Hi, it's Susanna and Jarrett. As we look to finish recording Season 3 of the Well-Trained Mind podcast, we want to do another question and answers episode. Last season, we so enjoyed receiving questions from you all. So if you have a question for me or for Susan Bauer, send it to podcast@welltrainedmind.com. That's podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can on the final episode of this season. Thank you so much for your participation. Now enjoy the episode.
Hi, I'm Susan Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings. And today we're talking about testing.
Very exciting.
In some reinforcements. We have two of our wonderful colleagues from the Well-Trained Mind Academy. First, we have Julia Collier here, who is the Dean of the Well-Trained Mind Academy. Thanks for being here, Julia.
Happy to be back. Thank you.
Yes, as you all may remember, Julia was here for our episode about choosing the right online school. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, go check it out. And we also have Sandra Amoroso, who is an instructor with over 20 years of experience as an educator in both traditional and classical schools. She also works as a consultant with classical schools, has homeschooled her own children at different stages. So thank you, Sandra, for coming here and bringing your expertise as well.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
We're talking about testing today because I think that could be a very scary subject for a lot of homeschoolers. It's not something we do as routinely as families in the public school setting. So hopefully this episode brings some comfort in the form of information about different tests you'll run into, how to prepare for them, how to decide which ones are worth taking and whatnot.
Right. So we're actually going to talk about 3 types of tests. We're going to talk about end of year testing, and that would primarily be for elementary and middle school students, although high school students can also do this end of year testing. We're going to talk about college admissions tests like the SAT and the ACT. And then we're going to also talk about advanced placement tests or AP tests. So I think we're going to start with what in a lot of ways is the simplest, which is this end of grade testing, which, in many states, probably the majority of states, some sort of standardized testing is required of home educators at the end of the year. Some states require it every year. Some states require it every other or every 3 years. But it is a way of showing that your kids are advancing forward. Mm-hmm. Now, those of you who have listened to anything that I have ever said or written will know I am not a huge fan of standardized testing. Standardized testing is...
Wait, what?
I know. Hi, Julia. Let me introduce myself. Julia and I have known each other for so many years. Yes, she knows this about me. Standardized testing to me really is just an expression of how artificial our school system is. Mm-hmm. That, you're going to get this kid to sit down, do a bunch of random questions, answer a bunch of random questions, fill out bubbles with a pencil, or I don't know, do people still do that? They're probably mostly moving online. But anyway, however they're administered, that this is somehow going to tell you how the student is doing. Just philosophically, I just find that just kind of repugnant because it just doesn't take any account of how children actually learn and develop.
I need to do a shameless fangirl plug here for Susan's book, Rethinking School.
Yes.
So for those of you who are listening, who are doing your own approach to education, not necessarily homeschooling fully, if you have not read Rethinking School, please, it is one of my favorite texts that you've written, Susan. And I think it really dives into the problems with all of this standardization and structure and organization around education in a way that really stifles true learning.
Right. And I think, when I was teaching in public school, one thing that I felt as a teacher that I saw that was common, and I think homeschool parents could probably fall into this as well, is this pressure on the tester as far as what the results will be. Kind of, you start to weigh your worth as an educator on how your kids test. And the students actually feel that too. The students in the classrooms where I was teaching in the schools where they were pushing end of grade testing so hard because I was in a school where if they didn't have a certain test score, the whole administration was going to have to change. And so there's this big push that the kids are feeling. And we really don't want to recreate that in our homeschool classes where kids are feeling like their worth and their parents' worth as a home educator is based on these very imperfect testing environments and scores and such.
And having said all of that, we're still going to recommend that you do them. And here is why, right? I'm glad Julia brought up Rethinking School, because Rethinking School I wrote as a way to say, you can take control of the educational experience, whether or not you're homeschooling. At the same time, here are constraints. And you know what? Life is full of constraints. We can't do exactly what we want to do all of the time, because that's not how grown-up life works. So, introducing your kid to the idea that, you know what, we're going to do this standardized test because we have to is not the worst thing in the world, as long as there are constraints here. As Susanna says, you don't weigh your worth as a home educator on the results of standardized tests. I mean, I have a couple of other caveats, particularly for elementary and early middle school students. I would not do standardized testing if possible that is content-based. I would do skill-based, right? So language arts and math, because the problem with content-based testing, which is not required in most states, if it's required, okay, you've got to do it. But if it's not required and you do it and what you've been studying and the kids' interests don't happen to line up to the content, then you get an artificially low score, and it's just discouraging for everybody. On the other hand, testing that measures language arts skills and math skills, I think can be really actually valuable.
Right.
It can give you some sense of where you are, whether you're moving forward, where huge gaps might be. And, you know, we're, as parents, we talked about this a lot in our homeschool fails episode. You can find huge gaps, things you just forgot to teach your kids. And so standardized tests can be really helpful in that way.
Right. When I was being homeschooled, I come from a family of writers. We all love to write, and kind of natural writers. And so we usually did really well on the language arts end of grade tests. But one year I struggled with the mechanics portions. I think a lot of my other siblings did too. And my mom noticed that our whole score was lowered by the fact that we were doing not very well in mechanics. And so she ended up adding back in some formal grammar instruction, which we hadn't been doing for a few years. We'd just been reading and kind of free writing. And that ended up being really helpful and useful for her to be able to recognize that. So that's just an example of how you could use a standardized test to identify a gap in your homeschool.
Plus, I think tests are just part of life, right? So, I mean, you have to take a driver's ed test. You've got to take tests in almost every licensing thing that you're going to do. And just getting used to the idea that you take a test, it's not the be all and end all, but it's also just, it's not that big a deal.
Right.
It can be really valuable for students.
Yeah. I mean, if the very first time you're taking a test is the SAT or, something for college entrance, or even if you don't think you need to take tests because you're not interested in college, you want to go more of a trade route. My husband is a plumber, and he had to take a huge test to become a licensed plumber. And that test actually prevents, it's so scary and it's so long and it's so difficult. It prevents a lot of plumbers from kind of upping their salary by getting that license. So even if you are moving into a trade, oftentimes there will be tests in your adult future. So that's something to keep in mind, regardless of whether or not you want to pursue college.
Yeah. And so just so we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this, I guess what we're coming down to is if your state requires them, absolutely do them. If your state doesn't require them, consider making them part of your end of year routine, just because then kids are going to be prepared for the whole testing experience when you get up to college admissions tests, which have a lot more weight to them. I'm a big fan of, particularly for elementary students, of the Seton homeschool testing, because you can order it from Seton and do it yourself at home. There's no reason to put an elementary school student in a completely unfamiliar setting. That in itself can sometimes really distort the outcome of a standardized test. So you can do it at home. You send the result, you send the little sheets off, Seton scores them and sends you back the score. And here's a really important thing to remember. You don't have to submit those. You can do them again. You can look at what's going on. You can realize, wait, my kid didn't actually know how to fill in any of the little bubbles or whatever the problem is.
Right.
So just the act of taking the test doesn't lock you into anything, But, I would just say that as kids start to get older, as you're moving particularly towards and into middle school and particularly later middle school, do think about having them do their tests in a more classroom institutional setting, because learning to deal with the nerves of testing in an unfamiliar setting is also a skill. That's something they're going to have to learn. So I wouldn't put an elementary school student through that, but definitely for later middle grade, then that's a time when they should start getting used to taking a test in a classroom with people that they don't know. And again, that's just a life school.
Right. Absolutely. And I can put a link in the show notes to that testing service that you mentioned. But I think that is a pretty good, quick and dirty overview of end of year testing. Let's move on to SAT and ACT testing, or the types of tests that you do as part of your college admissions process. At least right now, there was a moment where it seemed like SAT testing wasn't going to be required, maybe around 2020, 2021. Is that still the case?
Julia, you want to speak to that? I'm so sad about that, because it looked like it was going to be a real moment and then it went away.
Yeah, and especially with the reversal of affirmative action and the commitment of many colleges and universities to equity, there's an argument for standardized testing as a way to give students who are in some ways disadvantaged a fair chance. And the most well-known example of this is the statement put out by Dartmouth's president, where she said standardized test scores are an important predictor of a student's success in Dartmouth's curriculum. So that's true regardless of background. And then she also says in a test optional system, many applicants don't submit test scores, and that disadvantages applicants from less resourced families because Dartmouth admissions considers applicants' scores in relation to local norms. So, for example, if a 1400 SAT score from an applicant whose high school average is about 1,000, that gives a lot of really good information about what that student is capable of. But the issue there is trying to undo a lot of stereotypes about testing and test scores. How do you get that message out? Like, even if you don't have the test score that is on the bracket of, like, say what you need, you should still submit it because we know that you're doing better than everyone else in your area. That's kind of a tough one.
Oh boy, there's so many things we could delve into there, but I think okay,
this is the juicy part of the episode.
but I think what we're hearing is that this isn't going to go away. Okay, it's not going to go away. So we have to think. All right, kids want to go to college. The best way to help advantage their college applications is for them to do well on the SAT or the ACT.
And by the way, it really doesn't matter which one you take.
Okay.
And I know really, like, truly, it doesn't matter.
Well, a few years ago, Julia, I would say that there were more schools that took the SAT than the ACT. So if you were only going to take one, we used to always say, do the SAT. Is that no longer the case?
I think most colleges that have standardized tests take both. Check the college website as you are preparing for your admissions packet. But every time I look at the common data set for universities, they have both statistics listed. So every college admissions officer I've spoken to, consultant that I've spoken to, they really cannot say one is better than the other.
Okay.
And Julia, like you mentioned, most colleges, if there's a particular one you're interested in, you can go to their website and see which ones they accept or if they have a preference, which one they prefer. But the good news is, even though they're not going away, they are tests that you can practice and improve on. They're not, they are not scary in the sense that it's just this unknowable behemoth of a test. There's a lot of resources for practicing them. I took my SATs twice. I got a much better score the second time just because I had had more practice with the sort of internal logic of the SAT question, which you kind of get used to after doing a bunch of them. So it's something that you can prepare for, and it's probably worth it to spend some time preparing if your student is college bound and wants to get into a particular college. It's worth it to take the time.
I'm not even going to say probably a good idea. It is 100% a good idea. We had a family friend a few years ago who called me because, he follows all my work on classical education, has a very bright 15-year-old daughter, and he's putting together this curriculum for her. And he said, I want to make sure she does well on her SATs. What classic literature should she study? What should she take Latin?
I wish it worked like that.
I know. And I said, okay, on the one hand, over here, study what you want to study that you find educationally useful. manual. And on the other hand over here, go get an SAT prep book and work through it. There is nothing that you're going to be able to put into this lovely, rich high school curriculum that is going to give your kid as much of an advantage as studying to the dang test.
Right.
And there is a very particular formula. So one of my most recent uplifting stories is I work with a student at the academy who is so smart, truly one of the top 1% of students I've ever worked with. And he is brilliant at math, could not break 700 when he was taking the math portion of the SAT. In fact, the first time he took it formally, even though he was getting around 760 on the practice, got a 660. And it was like such a blow. So he did really specific tutoring with somebody who understands how the questions are asked, how students will be tricked into thinking something that is different from what the question wants, worked with him. He took the test again and he got a 790, an almost perfect score on the math section.
Wow.
So that is truly the test, not the student's ability.
Absolutely.
Now, Sandra, I think you have some experience with both taking and teaching SAT prep classes. How do those classes work, and how does that help students?
Yeah, I think that, so my experience is I've done SAT prep classes before, and then myself before entering graduate school did all of the prep classes for the GRE. So I've seen it from both sides. I wish I had taken SAT prep classes, I guess. I mean, I only took the SAT once when I was in high school, and it was sufficient a score enough to get me into the school I wanted. But I do always wonder, I wonder what I would have done if I had actually been prepared for it. But the GRE was different. And then once I was teaching high school students on the SATs, because what those tests do, and you telling that story, Julia, about your student, I know exactly what was going on there. The math student is an incredible student they know their formulas, they know their calculations, but those tests don't often actually want you to calculate out and see if you can get the right answer. They're actually testing your logic. They're asking you to look at a problem. And if you understand what they're asking you to do, you could look at the problem and within 10 seconds know what the answer is, because there's only one possible answer that it could be based on your understanding of math concepts. But you could spend 10 minutes doing a very long calculation without a calculator, and getting the perfect answer, but you wouldn't possibly be able to answer every question correctly in the amount of time that you're given if you did all of those calculations. But if you haven't been trained and understand that that's how those tests are written and how you're supposed to be thinking about and approaching those questions, you're not going to know how to approach those questions when you're sitting down to take the test. So training is important, and it will make a difference in how you score on the exam.
So when you are looking at SAT prep, I would encourage you to go with one of the name brands. Don't cut corners. So there's Barron's and Princeton, and then there's an official, something called the official SAT study guide. Two things. First of all, don't go for a cut rate one, because you're not getting actual SAT questions from previous tests. And all of those guides give you actual SAT questions, not sort of rip-off, rephrased SAT questions. And that's important because the phrasing of the questions matters. The angle of the questions matters. The choices that they give and how close those choices are, all of that really, really matters. And then, so they're going to cost more, but that is absolutely something to spend the money for. The second thing is, don't go get one from a previous year. Even if you can get it cheaper, used, go get the most recent one, because these tests change every single year. So you've got to spend the money, whether it's the money on the class or the money on the more expensive prep book. If you're going to go to the trouble of studying, that is absolutely worth it.
And if I can throw in a quick plug for Schoolhouse.World, it is a program that Saul Khan is working on. My sister is also a part of it, but they're trying to sort of level the playing field as far as SAT prep go by offering free resources online. And they're very high quality. They work with CollegeBoard and a lot of universities. So they have SAT boot camps, which is another option where you can get peer-to-peer online tutoring on SAT questions. And I can link that in the show notes.
So this is a great time to talk about how the difference in how we used to study for the SAT or the ACT when it was pen and pencil, paper and pencil, excuse me. And now that it's digital, the SAT is something called adaptive. And you can look at the CollegeBoard site, which we'll link in the show notes. And basically what happens is that each section, reading, writing, and math, are divided into 2 separate modules. And you are routed between modules based on your performance in the first module. So, it's two sections, reading and writing / math.
Right.
So the first module in each section includes half the questions. Depending on how you answer the questions in the first module, you'll be routed to a second module, which has a different mix of difficulty levels. The mix of questions in the second module is, on average, either of higher or lower difficulty than the first module. So the big concern is, well, how can I get a perfect score if I don't do well in the first module and then I'm given the easier second module? And so the College Board says you won't be disadvantaged. You'll be presented with questions tailored for your abilities. Think of it this way: to get a 1600 on the paper and pencil SAT, you must answer every single question correctly, which is extremely rare. If you even get a couple of questions wrong during any part of the test, there's no chance you'll score a perfect 1600. The same principle applies for multi-stage adaptive digital assessments. So it is even more, I just say it adds to the argument for some specific, well-done test preparation, because this is its own animal.
Oh boy. I don't know if we're comforting parents at this point with all of this information, but we're doing our best here.
These are the hoops. These are the hoops that we jump through. And I, again, over and over, what I say to parents at the academy, what I say to parents when we talk to them in consulting is, all of these things exist. What we are really hoping to teach in our courses as parents, as educators, is how to find self-worth inside, so that you're not reliant on your SAT score or your AP test or the college you get into to feel like you have accomplished something, because we're trying to raise lifelong learners. So we're constantly looking for the ways that we feel enriched inside, and not just because of some score on a test, which is a lot easier said than done. But, it's a nice little reminder.
Now, there are some things that parents need to keep in mind when it comes to SAT and ACT testing, just from a practical point of view. And all of these things change constantly. So you've got to Google, go to the official websites for the SAT.
I will link that in the show notes.
We'll link that. The SAT typically, I don't know if this is still the case, but traditionally, I should say, has been given twice a year. The ACT often is 5 times a year. So, just be aware of when the test is being given. Realize, and I think this sneaks up on a lot of parents, particularly with your oldest child, that your kid is going to have to finish those college applications in January of their senior year. And that means those test scores have to be in. So you're going to want to take it in the fall. Yes, you can wait and take it again. Usually there's a January or February administration, sort of a late winter administration, but that's really going to disadvantage the kid. So my suggestion would be that the first time they do the SAT, do it in the spring of the junior year, so that gives you a chance to take it again in the fall of the senior year if your scores aren't what you would hope for.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of parents just forget about this and they hit it for the first time in the senior year, at which point you're kind of running out of time. I don't mean to sound drastic about it.
Well, in fact, one of the nice things about the digital test is that it is offered a lot more for the SAT.
A lot more often.
Now.
Yep, that is
now
good.
there are 7 opportunities to take it in a testing year.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, so this year was August, October, November, December, a little bit of a break, March, May, June.
Okay.
So you have plenty of opportunities to take the test and try to raise your score. You could also, if it's available to you, because this is one of the issues we'll talk about with AP testing, if you can get your homeschooled student a seat in a school that will allow you to take the PSAT, you should do it. Take it, try it, see how they do. It's a great way to start letting your student understand the testing environment, what it's like to work with the computer, what it's like for that length of time. Again, what you were saying in the beginning of the show, like creating the test environment. But it's tough to find schools that'll let you take the PSAT if you're not enrolled in their actual brick and mortar school.
And Julia, just to clarify for our listeners, the PSAT, is that like a junior SAT or what exactly is that?
It is the practice SAT exam.
Awesome. So it's the exact same thing, but just a practice.
And it is for students who are younger. So the PSAT and
it's pitched a little bit lower.
Yes.
Okay.
PSAT NMSQT.
So it's an SAT for younger children, so they can start practicing that kind of environment, the type of questions early.
Yes. It's predictive of how you might do on the SAT. It is also used for a lot of scholarships, internships, enrichment programs for younger students. They'll ask you to take the PSAT if you have it, they'll ask you to submit your PSAT score as part of your application package.
Now, I will say there's a lot of misinformation about the PSAT. So I've heard a lot of parents say, but you can only take it once. No, that's not true. There is one particularly administration of the PSAT, which is designated by the National Merit Scholarship people as the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. That one you can only do once. You can't try again and again and again to qualify for National Merit Scholarship. I got to say, a National Merit Scholarship is sort of a moonshot. I mean, there's not that many out there. I wouldn't plan my world around getting a national merit. Julia's applauding.
We have a finalist.
We do. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, okay.
Very excited. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Oh, no, that is exciting. No, that is exciting. The thing with National Merit Scholarships is that they do use the pre-SAT scores as their qualifying, but then they look at what you're going to study, where you want to do it, what field you're thinking of specializing in. And I will say, I'm sorry, this is back in the dark ages, but both my brother and I were National Merit finalists. And I said that I was going to study ancient Greek, and he said he was going to study computer science, and he got a scholarship and I didn't. So just be aware, it does tend to be a little bit, I'm not at all bitter. I'm fine. I love my brother. I'm not still laboring under anyway. But just do be aware that actually getting a National Merit Scholarship, there's a lot more to it than just the PSAT score. Yeah. But anyway, so pre-SATs. I'm interested to hear what you guys think of this. I 100% agree with Julia that it's good for the kid to go in and take the pre-SAT. I have a couple of my children who suffer from severe anxiety, not test anxiety as such. They were okay with testing, just sort of more generalized, just struggling with anxiety. And of my two kids who really had a hard time with this, neither one of them wanted to take the pre-SAT because they were afraid that they wouldn't do well, and then it was going to like put them in a spiral. And they'd be like, oh, well, I'll never do well on the SAT. And in both cases, I said, okay, I hear you. We're not going to do the pre-SAT. And they kind of went into the SAT cold. We did study for it, but they went into it without that and only took it once, didn't take it again, and both got into the college that they wanted. I just put that out there as sort of you got to deal with a kid where the kid is at. And if you do have a kid who has performance anxiety, or just generally is going to be scared of the results, then that's just something to keep in mind.
I totally agree. Again, it's know your student, pay attention, listen to your student, think about the whole child, the whole educational experience. It's really easy to come on and talk with you all that are all educators about these big blanket trends that we see in education. But everyone who's listening has 1, 2, 3 children at home who they are thinking about very specifically.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just do a quick poll here. Of the 4 of us that are on this podcast, I love standardized tests.
Oh.
I enjoy them. I'm like, I can do this. So I don't know, Sandra, how do you feel about this?
I love them. I see them as something to conquer. But I don't necessarily want to subject students who, don't see it the same way. And I am on the same page with you that I also don't see them as, the be all end all assessment of either the whole person or even the academic achievement or academic levels. Each test tells you something, but it doesn't tell you everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and let me just add that when I say I love standardized tests, you guys know how I feel about standardized tests. I think they're actually pretty pernicious. And if you could avoid them, that would be great. I just enjoy taking them myself.
That does make so much sense considering your are horseback riding and the rules and dressage and what you need to do and what you're, if you follow any of Susan's socials, she talks about, her horse shows. I mean, that's totally makes sense to me that the thing that you do for fun, you like to do it in a competition setting.
I liked having done them. I did not enjoy the process. I cannot relate to enjoying taking tests. However, it was fun to be able to study for something knowing that it was going to count and I was going to see that progress. And that was rewarding for me.
And we'll be right back.
The Well-Trained Mind Academy, founded by Susan Wise Bauer, offers live online instruction and classical teaching methods that fit your students' educational plan. Our instructors are highly qualified in their fields and have years of experience in teaching, tutoring, and homeschooling. We work closely with students, parents, and instructors to create an educational environment that fits the needs of each family. From calculus to Japanese to essay writing to medieval history, the Well-Trained Mind Academy offers 150 courses for grades 5 through 12. Visit WTMacademy.com to learn more.
Well, I feel like that since we're at this point of talking about the difference between actually learning things and taking tests, that this might be a good time to talk about advanced placement.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Julia and Sandra, I've heard you both have some experience with actually grading AP tests. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm so excited to hear about what Sandra has to say because I did it 10 years ago. And you just did it this year, right?
Yes, I am. I'm actually a current employee of the College Board, or their organization that employs the people that grade AP exams. So yes, I have a few years under my belt of grading the AP US History test, of which I am an instructor for AP US History. So yes, I grade those. It is a very, very long week of reading hundreds of essays, but I will have to say, we have a lot to say about AP tests, but I will have to say that I can't speak too much to the processes that are involved there because, we're not supposed to talk about how we're trained and how we do that and all those things. I will say that my confidence levels in the accuracy of the scoring and the time and effort that is put into ensuring that every student's essays are looked at carefully and intentionally, and that each student is being given a fair and correct score is very high. And it makes me a better teacher. Makes me a better teacher across the board. I've learned to grade things better and makes me a better teacher of the subject matter itself. So I have good things to say about it.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So whatever you can share with us, you're given a rubric, I believe?
Yeah, so we have the same rubric that every AP teacher it's available on the internet. Anybody can see it. But we're given the rubric, and we go through a training process and make sure that we know what it is that is expected, and then then we tackle them. We're reading each one very carefully, and there are checks and balances put in place so that it is objective, and that each student is being graded on the same standard of measure. So like I said, my confidence level is fair. I suppose before I did that, I wasn't so sure that how can they really say, these are subjective tests. There's so much essay involved. How can they really say that, isn't it based on your grader? And now that I'm on the other side of that, I say, no, it's not. It's fair.
And there are checks in place as well, in the sense of your essays will generally match the caliber of your short answer questions or your fill in the blank questions. So if you didn't choose any correct answer in the multiple choice section and then you wrote all perfect essays, your test would be looked at again. So they're looking at the whole test, not just the sections, because part of it's graded by a machine and part of it's graded by a person. At least that's how it was for the literature exam, which is what I graded.
Yeah, there are, again, I'm not even privy to all of the different ways that they have to ensure fairness and accuracy, but the ones that I do know only raise my confidence level that they have lots of checks and balances in place that are implemented on each and every exam to ensure that the grades that are coming out are fair.
One of the things that grading did for me and my feeling about the College Board was not so much about the students and the graders, but was about the whole College Board itself. Are we ready to go into that?
Oh, yes. So, well, I think we have to figure out. So now that you guys have talked a little bit about the grading process, and I hope have reassured parents that it is not a completely subjective process, but they are getting some good feedback on good and warranted feedback on the students' testing. Do we want to do the pros or the cons? Because I got to say we're pretty evenly balanced here. As I look at what we're going to talk about, maybe we do the pros first.
The pros of taking an AP test, and then we can go into the cons.
Yes, exactly. So, because I think actually most parents of high school students kind of go into this thinking like AP is there's like the blue ribbon standard. If my kid is going to demonstrate academic achievement, AP is the way to go. So let's indulge them for a minute and talk about all of the good reasons to take AP tests. And I guess we would start with, particularly for homeschooled students, a university is going to want to see that a student has challenged herself academically, has reached a certain level. And AP is kind of one of the most, there are a lot of different ways to do that, but AP is sort of one of the best recognized, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of a proof of concept where, to an extent, this is true really at any school. What is an A at one school is not necessarily objectively the same thing as an A at another school.
Absolutely.
But how does that's even more true on a homeschool transcript. If the parent is assigning an A, what does that mean to the college admissions officer that's looking at it? So the more that you can give them something that is objective, that is outside of the subjectiveness of the parent, that is certainly helpful. And AP is, in this sense, a gold standard of objectivity. It is about the most objective thing that you can give them because the AP test is offered only one time per year. It is nearly impossible to cheat on. Like all the same students are taking it's not the exact same test, but it's the same exact version of the test on the same day every year, being graded on the same standards. So if you're getting a 5 on the test, that is a solid 5. That is a reliable 5. The tests are graded on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is the highest score. It doesn't matter what test it is. They're all graded that same way.
Gotcha.
And not only is it a way to corroborate the GPA that, parents are awarding to their homeschool children, but it can also be a boost of confidence for the student themselves in a very similar way. I know for myself, I didn't take a lot of online classes, or I didn't take a lot of classes outside of my home, even in high school as a homeschooler. So taking AP tests gave me a boost of confidence that I was actually ready for college level work, because I thought I was working hard, but seeing those test scores was like, okay, so I can do this. And that really helped me as I was working towards getting into college.
Yes, for sure. So I think that's very true. Whether it's a student that has done the studying themselves or taken a course and then decided to advance up themselves by studying extra to take the AP exam, or has enrolled in an AP level course, the level of coursework that you have to do to pass the AP exam, and so a passing score would be a 3, 4, or 5. It is college level coursework, and if you are in an AP class, so that would be if you're taking a high school class that has been approved by the College Board as an AP level course, so as an instructor of an AP course, I have to submit materials to the College Board showing what I'm going to be teaching. I have to get approved. That coursework is at a college level. And yes, I am to an extent teaching towards the test. I am making sure that my students are going to be prepared to be very successful on the exam. But in order to do that, they are working at a very high level. They are not doing high school level work. They are doing college level work. So this does two things. One, it challenges students who are ready to move on to a higher level, but it also pushes students to step up their kind of academic game. They have to learn to manage their schedules, manage their studying, manage the course load. And when they do that, the success that they feel in the process and their confidence levels that like, I really could succeed in college. Like I actually can do this. College is no longer so intimidating. It opens up doors in their mind for what they actually are capable of achieving, especially I think for a homeschooled student who has not necessarily been measured outside of their own home so much. So that's, I think that is a good thing.
Now, there are a couple of sort of, and those are all really great reasons to look for an AP class and for a kid to take the final test, since we're talking about testing. There are a couple of sort of more, how should I put this, administrative sort of reasons to take an AP test. So if you're, and some of these don't actually apply to homeschoolers. So for example, if you're in a private school or a public school, in your classroom generally, some schools weigh AP classes more heavily. So if you've ever seen, a kid who graduated from college with a 4.6 grade average, and you think to yourself, how on earth did that happen? It's because some schools, not all schools, but some schools weight AP classes more heavily because the assumption is that the kid is working harder than somebody who is in just a quote unquote regular. This is really tricky if you're a homeschooler because you're, sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but you're sort of making up your GPA anyway. The GPA for homeschoolers is not actually one of the major things that's going to make a college look at your transcript favorably. And also not all schools do it. So Julia, the academy, the Well-Trained Mind Academy doesn't weight GPAs.
No, because we're part of a whole educational journey that's happening outside of the school. So how could we say what our classes are weighed on Bobby's curriculum, Susie's curriculum? Everyone's doing something different. So we tell parents that when they create their own transcript, they can figure out what they want to do with the weighting. But as far as our classes are concerned, they're all very rigorous. And I want to plug Sandra so hard that her classes are amazing. And the way that she talks about AP and AP coursework, that's especially you, Sandra. That's your expectations, your expertise. So I hope everyone can be as lucky as our students to have someone like you teaching the AP class, because it certainly wasn't my experience in school. The kinds of AP teachers I had, they were just like, these are the questions. This is how you're going to answer them. This is how you write your essay. But that speaks to our philosophy about AP at the Academy, which is if we're teaching material that aligns with the content of the AP course, then we'll go for it. Why would we deny our students that opportunity? But we're not going to shove what we do into that box.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, which is to say, you shouldn't pick an AP class for the primary purpose of boosting GPA, because it's just,
And a couple of tangential things that are still on the pro side. There's this really great book called Who Gets In and Why by Jeffrey Salingo. He writes a lot for mass media publications about college admissions. And after interviewing dozens of college admissions officers, ultimately, like AP Calc is a test that is often looked at by selective colleges as a signal of academic achievement. So if you are math-minded and you have the opportunity to take AP Calculus, I would say go for it. And as far as the classes are concerned, yes, your GPA or your grade in the class is important, but what really matters for AP is what you get on the test.
Right.
So that's just because you have AP on your transcript, that doesn't really mean as much as your performance on the test. So getting that 4 or 5, and especially when it comes to college credit or jumping into a more advanced level when you start college, like that's what matters.
Right.
Yeah.
Not to increase anyone's testing anxiety, but
Yeah.
No, but it's worth remembering that, yes, that the proof of the pudding is actually the test that you take, not necessarily your grade in the class. So we'll just repeat that for parents.
Yes,
yeah.
For sure. And I think too, I mean, though there can be a lot of questions as to whether schools will accept the AP score or accept the AP exam, or whether it's a competitive school or a non-competitive school. One of the things that I think can happen or that does happen, is that whether you're going to get the credits for it or not, or you're going to reduce the number of credits that you have to take, one of the things that can happen is that it becomes like a placement exam for your first year in college. So if you say take the AP US History exam and you get a high enough score, you're not then going to have to take US History as your first coursework in your humanities curriculum for your general education, which most colleges are going to require. That's like a basic general education requirement. If you've just taken it in your junior and senior year of high school and you've taken it at a pretty rigorous level, that's pretty boring to have to go and repeat that same kind of coursework, when you could then go into school and take something that's far more interesting to you, that's in that same category, but perhaps you might take the history of modern medicine or the history of Africa, or, there's all kinds of different options. Same thing would be in a science or in a math curriculum. You will advance to a higher level that is of greater interest to you. So it isn't always just about reducing the number of credits that you have to take in college, but it can be about placement as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we should say, though, that this is entirely at the discretion of the college.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to exempt you. They don't have to give you credit. They don't have to do anything with that. So don't invest a whole lot of time and money in AP classes because you think that that's going to automatically give you either college credit or exemption, because the colleges individually make that decision and you don't really have much say.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you are looking at a particular college, they should have on their website
Mm-hmm.
what APs exempt you from what classes. So you can kind of plan that out. That's what I did, and it was helpful. But again, you have to get a certain score and then make sure that it actually works at the particular university that you're going to.
Right. And I will say there is a lot of really bad advice out there in homeschool circles. If you go to a homeschool convention, I've been by so many booths that basically say, take AP courses and also CLEP, college level examination program, and you can go into college as a junior. And the way that these organizations that are pushing this, and they're mostly test prep organizations, it makes it sound like if you take all of these tests, you don't have to do 2 years of college. And that is not the way it works. A college may choose to give you college credit for an exam, but they're going to make you pay for the credit hours. And why would you pay for credit hours and not get any teaching in exchange? It's just a terrible, terrible bargain. So be very, very cautious of anybody that tells you that if your kids get high scores on any exams, including AP, they're going to be able to skip years of college, because it doesn't work that way.
Or you get a 5 on Spanish, but then that means that you have to take 2 years of other Spanish.
You've still got to do 2 years. Yeah, you're not getting out of it. A college is not going to give you a 4-year degree after 2 years.
Colleges are businesses. Don't forget, they are businesses.
And that, I think, that brings us to the cons.
Right.
Perhaps.
I was going to say, I think we have some mixed feelings even within this panel about AP. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes with the reasons not to choose an AP test.
Well, I mean, I would say just to start out with, let's just not get too stuck on AP being the only way to demonstrate mastery of a subject. There's so many ways that particularly a homeschooled student can demonstrate that they have studied something. And that's actually what the college is looking for: interest and achievement. So an AP score is one way to demonstrate that, but there's just lots of other ways. Community college classes, putting together portfolios. There's just so many other ways to do it as well.
Long-term projects that involve internships or volunteer opportunities that show a depth of knowledge in an area that's specialized to you. That's a really great thing that you can do. It's a lot of work. I think one of the reasons why people love AP is because it's pretty easy to find, and you can take it, like, it's accessibility. It's just, of the thousands of decisions we make every day as educators and as parents, who wants to make another one?
Yeah.
So
Well, and
that's an easy way out in some ways.
It kind of has sticker value, right? Everybody knows what an AP class is.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And talk about, this is very familiar to the alternative education community, is the voices that are telling you have to take AP are so loud.
Mm-hmm.
So loud. And it is really one of those things where, Susan, you have a good line of like what you're supposed to say at a dinner party if somebody asks you like, oh, well, don't you think you're messing your kid up by homeschooling, or
pass the bean dip?
Yeah, pass the bean dip. So, I mean, oh, your kid's never going to get into school if they don't take AP classes. Well, pass the bean dip. Thanks. So,
I think one of the things
anyway.
with the AP option is that you do have to look at it as, yes, there are these advantages, but there are so many AP classes that are on the table that you could take. That doesn't mean that you order everything and that you take them all. You look selectively at one, which is going to be of greatest interest to your student, which is going to accomplish something for them, if any of them, because each student is different. Their goals are going to be different. And you have to look at the student holistically. From a classical education point of view, we are looking at how do we accomplish human flourishing in each student, in each child. And that comes in all of the different aspects of each person. So there is, are they able to have time for fine arts? Are they able to participate in some sort of athletics? Do they have a job? Are they able to do an internship? And it doesn't even mean they have to do all of these things, but can they do all of those things and be taking 4 AP classes in a year and also taking college classes at the local junior college? And the answer is no, they can't. Some are going to be able to handle greater loads than others, but be smart and be wise and help direct them, and also guard their mental health so that we're not raising unnecessary anxiety such that they feel like they'll never succeed or accomplish anything in life unless they have, mastered every single AP class. No, that's not necessary. But are a few probably a good idea, particularly for higher achieving students that are looking at more competitive options? Yeah, that's probably a good thing. So look into it and be selective.
I do feel like since we've used the word competitive college, that I would just like to point out that competitive college is not the same as good college. So competitive means that the ratio of students accepted is very low compared to the number of students who actually apply. And it's well known that quote unquote competitive colleges kind of
pad the applications.
They pad the applications. They encourage students to apply who they know don't have a prayer of getting in, because that makes them more competitive. They've got more applications and fewer people in comparison who get accepted. So
another way you might say it is a brand name.
Yes.
Like a brand name college.
Yep. It's a brand name college. Yeah. Which is not completely coterminous, but close to with Ivy League. Or public Ivies. So I guess this kind of gets us to the racket part of the whole.
I don't know if I want to go there.
I want to go there.
Sandra's closing about a few and how it could be worthy to your student is so good. Like, why ruin it?
Well, I know. Okay. Because we're classical educators, and so we're having a Socratic dialogue. And I agree. And Sandra, that was a wonderful, wonderful explanation. I just, as someone who talks to so many parents who feel incredibly pressured, that particularly, and this is the pernicious part of it, particularly parents of bright, motivated, driven kids. Are so susceptible to this because they know the kid can do an AP class and can get the score, but should they, right? And you said that very well, not necessarily. But we just need to point out that, AP classes are big money. And the money is not coming to you, dear parents.
So the College Board is technically a nonprofit.
Technically.
So one would surmise that means that you don't make a profit, right?
Not quite how it works.
For the past 15 years, not only are they making a profit, they're making so much money.
Yeah.
They have, it's well documented. We can put some links, or Susanna can put some links in the show notes that, they hide some of the money that they have in Caribbean tax havens. Their CEO makes a $1.8 million salary for an educational nonprofit. $1.8 million. They spend over $8 million a year on executive compensation. Yeah. They, in their most recent 990, which is a public tax document, they had over $1.5 billion in cash and investments. That's insane. Where are they getting this money? So, for example, this is the racket part when I think it trickles down to the consumer, which, because ultimately we are consumers of a testing product.
Yep.
The cost of the exam is $100. Well, $99. Mm-hmm. You need to register for the exam before November 1, I believe. Mm-hmm. Okay. The test isn't until May.
Yeah.
Now, Sandra, I would imagine in your classroom, there are students who by the time January rolls around, you talk about it and they're like, I don't want to take the test, or I wouldn't recommend that you take the test, right? So you have to register. If you cancel, you still pay $40. Mm-hmm. You don't get all your money back. If you register after November, if you're like, I'm going to wait until I'm a little bit further along this class to see if I want to take this test. Because again, at least at the academy, we are not teaching to the test, and it's a part of what we are doing. You have to pay a late fee of $40.
Right.
So all of that is money that they're just getting without any actual test administration. There are states where if you enroll in a course, you have to take the exam no matter what. And students will, this is all anecdotal, by the way, students will write in their test booklet, my school paid for me to take this test. I don't want to do it. Like a large percentage of them.
Yeah.
And so the states are paying the College Board. So your public dollars are paying the College Board, a national nonprofit, for you to sit in a test, but not actually take the test. And there are other details, which I would be happy to talk about, but I feel like I have to cut it short because I would go crazy.
Well, we'll put some links. This is not under the radar. It is well known. Along with the fact that the College Board calls its profit excess revenue. So, we could all use some excess revenue, but they're a not-for-profit company, meaning they get massive tax breaks, but they're making a profit. They just call it excess revenue. It's the whole system kind of stinks.
Yeah.
And those of us who deal with parents who are scraping together tuition money, and money to make sure that their kids get every advantage. Now, I think, Sandra, you pointed out, which I think is really true, that if you go another way and you take a college course, that's expensive too. It's not like that's free. I guess I just feel like maybe there's a little bit more transparency. If you go to your local community college and take a dual credit course, you know where your money's going. You know why it's going there. Hopefully some of it is going to the poor adjunct instructor that's killing themselves teaching the class. But, your money is at least staying in your local school system. Whereas the AP is just it really is a big money machine, the whole College Board system.
And there are known AP courses that will not yield college credit, will not really get you anywhere. So like AP pre-calculus is not going to do anything for you.
Right. And yet it exists.
Right. AP computer science is not really going to do anything for you. Some of the AP art courses are not going to do anything for you. And so that they exist and that they are offered under this pretense of college preparation and possibly a break in college tuition is a falsehood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I want to go back to what Sandra said, because it was so well phrased that, when you're thoughtful and you think of your whole child, and Sandra, you should say it because you said it so well, that's what matters. That's how you can do it right.
Yeah. Well, why don't each of us, as we wrap up here, let's each have a closing statement. And I guess my closing statement would be treat AP classes the way you treat all other standardized testing, which is it's supposed to serve you, not the other way around. It's not supposed to oppress you. It's supposed to help you. And if you can see a good and realistic outcome, then yes, take an AP course, but don't be pressured into it and don't feel like it's somehow validating in a way that nothing else can do for you.
You're here.
Yeah, I would say, look at the most likely schools that your student may attend, which that is a really difficult thing to tell a parent, because these are often 9th, 10th, or
Yep.
9th is very young, but 10th is probably the youngest a student should be taking an AP course, and that would be a pretty high achieving student. But 11th and 12th grade, they don't necessarily know where they want to go yet, but then they maybe have some general ideas. Just go, you just Google AP tests at this school and you'll find the page. You'll get a general idea of what's going to be useful and what's not. And then, make targeted decisions, but don't fall into the trap of, I have to have a transcript that's just chock full of AP courses or chock full of dual credit courses. No, you need to have a transcript that and an application that shows who your student is on a whole level and gets them into the kind of school that they're going to want to go and create the kind of person that they want to actually be, not meeting some arbitrary outside standard of the quote unquote competitive school.
Yeah.
So be smart about it. Yes, they're useful. Yes, they're valuable, but don't fall into the trap.
Yeah. Well said.
Julia, do you have a closing statement?
I'm just nodding my head vigorously.
There we go.
As my closing statement, I'll just throw in my personal experience. I didn't take a whole bunch of APs. I took APs, just a few select ones in subjects that I was actually interested in the content of the test, history and English. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed taking the test. My siblings, some of them did dual enrollment instead. And in some ways that was a more seamless transition to our local university because the community college and the college had an agreement. So the transfer of credit was much more seamless. So, you just have to look at what resources are available to you and to your student and make that decision like everyone else has said.
Well said.
But with that, we are at over an hour, so we are going to close this episode. Thank you both, Julia and Sandra, for joining us and bringing your thoughts about testing to our listeners. I hope that all of this information is helpful to you all as you start navigating your homeschool journey and your testing journey. We threw a lot at you, so send us your thoughts and your responses to podcast@welltrainedmind.com. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Falari at ajfalari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.